Well, you are quite literally one of the OG professional athletes to go plant-based, go vegan, maybe the OG, and the first in combat sports that I know of. So
Yeah.
let's just
Mhm.
start from there because everybody's going to want to know that story, that serpentine that you went on. It was quite a long time ago when
Yeah.
you were inspired to completely change your diet. And I know you took out dairy first, which is a very smart move, and then you went
Yeah.
on to take all
Yeah.
animals out. So take us back to those. I just even want to hear some of those first moments, if you can remember them, when it was like, hey, wait a minute, this might be affecting my output, my performance, my health, and you made a change.
Yeah. So I mean, if you don't mind, I'll kind of go back a little bit further to like growing up. It always seemed like the right thing to do, just in the back of my mind. As a kid, you don't really have all that much control over what ends up on your plate and everything. And I was raised by a single mom, and she was, we weren't rich, and there was, we always had respect for animals, like the ethical side. We're nature people, I guess you could say. And it just seemed like common sense to be vegetarian, but whenever that was brought up, I mean, we're talking like the 80s and everything, and so there was a lot less. There was a lot less information out there, and it was sort of like this shrug your shoulders. Oh, well, that would be nice, but that's not really feasible, or that's expensive, or something like that. That would be the kind of answer that I would get whenever that would get brought up. So uh, fast forward throughout, I guess, to my teenage years. At this point, I had been experiencing. I wasn't what you would call like a sick child necessarily, like sickly or anything. I was very active and pretty healthy, but every year I would experience some sort of really bad cold and bad flu, like whether it was like scarlet fever or something crazy like that, or just like the nasty flus that are going around. And anytime I would have an infection or something, it would always end up going into my ears, my tonsils, my ears. I saw various ear, nose, throat doctors, and they all did the same thing. They just prescribed me antibiotics. And so every year I would get these ear infections, and it just kept getting worse and worse as I got a little older. And so I did a lot of research throughout my teenage years on like just natural medicine and like holistic stuff. And there's a guy, Dr. Weil, that had been around for a while, and he had a book that said, he said it mentioned that if you wanted to, if you were experiencing a lot of, ear infections and sinus infections and stuff like that, to eliminate dairy from your diet. And I kind of, looked at it at the age of 16 and kind of made a note of it, but I didn't really follow through. And it wasn't until I had like 3 years in a row of the worst ear infections, to the point where I got vertigo, and I had vertigo for a couple months. And extreme vertigo is really debilitating. And so, being a young person that wanted to do things, and like you mentioned, skateboarding, that was like my passion at the time. You can't even really walk around. You guys remember the the TV show Cops? How there was always this somebody running with the camera, and the camera was just shaking back when they had the giant, VHS cameras, and that's the
No
kind of
steady
cameras they
cam.
used back then. It felt like you were in an episode of Cops, like just walking around. Like I would want to go to walk to check the mail or something like that, and everything was just shaking and moving. It was awful, and trying to lay down or sleep or anything like that, laying your head back, it was also a problem. So sometimes the antibiotics ended up fixing things, but for the most part, it would just come back. And so, anyway, around the age of 19, I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm just going to remove milk and dairy. And I have not had a single ear infection since that happened, since I removed dairy from my diet. So
Were you eating a
while
lot of
that,
it?
what's that?
Like I'm thinking if people are listening and they're like, but I just have like a little bit of cheese every once in a
Sure.
while. Were you eating a lot of dairy? Medium, little
I was,
dairy?
you know what I was doing? I think that early on in my, like my young years, like 10, 11, 12, I was drinking a lot of milk because I was like a smaller kid and my mom believed those commercials, the
Yeah.
commercials where it's like, I'm drinking milk and I'm getting bigger and stronger and all this stuff. And so she was just doing what she thought was right. And so there was always milk in the house, and I would drink milk instead of water or juice. I just, okay, I'm thirsty, just drink milk. And I don't think that that helped. But by the time that I was like older, I think my aversion to it and the sensitivity that I have to it and like the excess amount of mucus and phlegm that it created with me, I think that was later on once I had gotten into my teenage years, and at that point I wasn't really drinking that much milk, but I was doing like these whey protein shakes and stuff like that, I think. And I would notice whenever I had that, like that my vertigo problems and my congestion would flare up. And so yeah, that was kind of a major thing for me, was like I wasn't drinking all that much milk by those final years, but whenever I would have something, especially like those whey protein shakes and all that garbage, I would end up feeling pretty awful afterwards. So yeah, so I removed that from my diet, and I have not had a single ear infection since, and I haven't had to deal with vertigo since then. So that was huge. And then at that same time, when I was like 19, I started working at an animal sanctuary, and it was run. It was like a farmed animal sanctuary, and it was run by ethical vegans, and they were really cool people. But I think at the age of 19, it was a little much for me because I hadn't met anyone that was a strict vegan before, and I didn't quite understand, the rules and the guidelines that they used with their choices as a consumer and dietary and everything. I just didn't quite understand it. It was kind of new to me, and I wasn't shocked or offended or anything like that. I was just I was working with them, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I like the direction they're going, but they were a little. I don't know. There were some things that at my age, there were some like, I wouldn't say red flags. Like I said, they were great people, and they kind of paved the way for me to see that this was an option. But at the time, at being 19, I think it was a little much. I remember like we had these sheep that we rescued, and we had a sheep pasture, and we took care of them and everything. And there was 20 some sheep, and the first one that was there, the lady who owned the place, she loved this sheep. It was like the first animal that she had rescued, and she said to me one time, yeah, every year when we get them sheared so that they don't overheat, because they produce wool whether they like it or not. She said, when we get them sheared, I think about like making a sweater out of her stuff, but then I think to myself, that wouldn't be very vegan of me. And at the time I was like, I don't understand that. What's with these rules and everything? And so it was a little, it was a little off-putting at the time, and I just didn't really know how to go about doing it. And so fast forward a few more years, once I had started fighting and I had started competing as a amateur athlete and then a professional athlete, I would think back on the time that I spent at the farm, and I would think back on those people, and I would think to myself, you know what, that is kind of, to me, the right thing to do is having a diet like that, and not buying leather, and just, as a consumer, not doing these things. And so I kind of made a note in my mind. All right, when I am done with all this professional athlete nonsense, I'm gonna one day be vegan. That's what I told myself early on the beginnings. And then as I was training more and more, I had pretty much eliminated every single animal product from my diet except for chicken and fish. And the only reason why I was using those is because I was told. And you guys know, you host this podcast. You know this narrative. I mean, they tell you need a gram of protein per pound of body weight, and you need lean protein and all this stuff, and you know, you just believe what they tell you because you don't know any better at the time. And what ended up happening is I saw a guy in 2004, and this is, the internet is still young at this point, but he had a blog, and he was a kettlebell instructor. So he wasn't a professional athlete, but he was a very strong, in shape, flexible guy who cared about his body and about health. His name is Mike Mahler, Mahler. He's actually still around, and I'm pretty sure he's still vegan. And he just gave an example of his diet. And I looked at like his like 3-day diet example, and I was like, I could do this. Like the only thing maybe that I'm doing differently than this is every now and then chicken or fish. So I removed those from my diet. I started eating a little bit more nuts and things like that, and I was like, oh, I feel fine. I don't feel worse. And it was just at that point, it was like a trial. Like I was like, I'm going to try this for about 2 months. So I tried it, and I was like, this is perfect. This is easy. Like this is not a problem for me at all. And luckily, at that time in the early 2000s, being in Los Angeles, I did have access to more restaurants that catered to the vegan diet, and I did, and the grocery stores had a little bit more selection. Nowadays, though, I don't think anyone has any excuses, because even if you go to like the middle of America in Iowa or something, you go to like their, you know, mainstream grocery store, they've got a whole lot of vegan options. Like things have changed a lot since then. So, but yeah, at the time it was really easy, and I didn't never really looked back. I never really had a reason to. I'm like, well, if I can start it now and I don't have to wait until I'm done being an athlete, then I'm fine. And my performance was never adversely affected at all. So yeah, it was. That's the mid length version, I guess.
I like it.